Rain lashed against Emily's window. Thunder rattled the old house, shaking its bones. Wind howled like a hungry wolf, scratching at the walls. It was the kind of night that made you want to crawl under the covers and hide. Emily sat curled up on the sofa, a book clasped in her hands. The words blurred together, her mind too distracted by the storm raging outside. She glanced nervously at the clock. It was almost midnight. She tried to focus on her book, but the storm was relentless. Each clap of thunder sent a shiver down her spine. The wind seemed to whisper her name, taunting her with its eerie moans. She wished desperately that she wasn't home alone. Suddenly, the shrill ring of the phone pierced through the storm's symphony. Emily jumped, her heart pounding in her chest. She stared at the phone, her breath catching in her throat. Who would be calling at this hour, especially on a night like this? Hesitantly, she reached for the phone, her hand trembling slightly. The caller ID flashed unknown number. A shiver ran down her spine. Emily hesitated for a moment, her finger hovering over the answer button. Curiosity, mixed with a growing sense of dread, compelled her to answer. Hello. Emily's voice was barely a whisper. Silence greeted her. She could hear faint breathing on the other end of the line, but no one spoke. Hello? She repeated, her voice trembling slightly. Who is this? The breathing continued, heavy and ragged, sending chills down Emily's spine. Fear coiled in her stomach like a snake. She hung up the phone with a trembling hand, her heart racing. Who was that? And why were they breathing so heavily? As if on cue, the lights flickered and died, plunging the room into darkness. Emily gasped, her heart leaping into her throat. The only light came from the occasional flash of lightning, illuminating the room in brief, terrifying bursts. The storm had knocked out the power. She fumbled for her phone, her fingers shaking as she activated the flashlight. The pale beam of light did little to pierce the oppressive darkness. Emily felt a wave of fear wash over her. She was alone in the dark, with a storm raging outside, and someone out there knew it. Just as she was about to call her best friend, a notification popped up on her phone screen. It was a text message from the same unknown number that had just called. Her blood ran cold. The message simply read, "Look outside." Section 4, whispers on the screen. Emily's breath caught in her throat. She hesitated for a moment, her heart pounding against her ribs. Fear warred with curiosity. Slowly, she turned towards the window, her hand trembling as she reached for the curtain. She peeked through the blinds, her heart pounding in her chest. The wind whipped her hair around her face as she strained to see through the darkness. And then she saw him, a tall, shadowy figure silhouetted against the backdrop of the storm. He was standing at the edge of the woods, staring directly at her. Emily gasped and stumbled backward, her hand flying to her mouth to stifle a scream. She fumbled with her phone, her finger hovering over the call button, but what would she say? What could she say? Before she could make up her mind, another message flashed on the screen. "I'm closer than you think." Section 5. A glimpse of terror. Panic surged through Emily. She raced to the front door, fumbling with the locks. Her hands were shaking so badly that she could barely get the key in the lock. Finally, she managed to unlock the door and bolted out into the storm. She ran towards the road, desperate to get away from the house, from him. As she ran, she risked a glance over her shoulder. The figure was gone. Relief washed over her, but it was short-lived, because now she could hear footsteps pounding on the pavement behind her. He was chasing her. Emily's breath hitched in her throat as she ran. The rain stung her eyes, blurring her vision. She could hear him getting closer, his heavy breathing echoing in the night. He was gaining on her. She had to get help. She had to find somewhere safe. Section 6. Face to face, she stumbled and fell, scraping her hands on the rough asphalt. Pain shot through her, but she couldn't stop. She scrambled to her feet and continued running, her lungs burning, her legs screaming for mercy, but it was no use. He was upon her. A hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around. Emily screamed, a primal sound of terror that ripped from her throat. She found herself staring into the face of her pursuer. His eyes, cold and calculating, held hers captive. His face was only inches from hers, his breath hot on her cheek. Fear, pure and paralyzing, washed over Emily. She tried to scream again, but no sound came out. She was frozen in place, trapped in the grip of terror. The last thing she saw before darkness claimed her was a cruel smile spreading across his face.